Welcome everyone. Bonjour. Thank you so much for being here. We were quite overwhelmed by the response, so thank you so much for responding. I am very excited about this event. My name is Michelle Bouffard. I do a lot of different things. I teach the WSCT, I write for a number of magazines, I'm on a TV show, but a big part of my work is actually on climate change and the solutions to adapt and mitigate climate change. So I know that climate change, unfortunately, is the topic of the hour, but this is something that I got interested in 2005 for the first time. And I remember at the time, I was trying to find some information. I was calling a research center in wine. I was talking to wine producer, and there were very little information. And at the time, I didn't really have the connection in the wine industry that I have today. I was much younger, and I thought, well, that's going to be the biggest challenge the industry will face. So one day when I have more knowledge and connection, I will organize something and really to get the expert together and exchange on the solutions. So that's how I started Tasting Climate Change, which is an international conference that I hold every 2 years. And it's usually in Montreal, but starting next year, it's going to move in different wine regions in the world. And you can watch it online also. You can go to my website, tastingclimatechange.com, and you will see lots of videos from previous conferences. The Rhône Valley is dear to my heart. It's a wine region that I actually go to a lot. And so it was only natural to work with them. Rhône, I want to thank Rhône actually for supporting this event. Côtes du Rhône specifically. They have approached me when they saw Tasting Climate Change. They came to me and said, well, you know the region quite well, so would you work with us to put on a conference that showcase what we do in the Rhône Valley to adapt and mitigate climate change. So today, it's a collaboration between Rhône, Côtes du Rhône, and Tasting Climate Change. I wrote a book for some of you who speak French, Quel vin pour demain. It was published in France and it's now available online. It's in French. And basically I wrote it with a scientist, a climatologist who wrote the first 2 chapters, and a master of wine, Jérémy Courtigman, who's based in France. And the book talks about the solutions to adapt and mitigate climate change. The book is meant for professionals. It is getting translated right now in Spanish and in English. So if you have interest, it will soon hopefully be in other languages. So today, some of the images come from the Rhône. Some of the information also will be from my book. And for some of, from the private reason, some of those images I was giving the permission to use for the PowerPoint today, but I won't be able to share my PowerPoint presentation because some of those images I'm not allowed to share with anyone. I was just giving the permission to share those images with you today. I think before we start, it's interesting to put things into perspective. When we look at where the Rhône Valley stands in terms of production. In France, it is the 2nd largest French appellation. So meaning, if a region like this commits to the environment, well, it has a big impact on France's vineyards. Today, we are going to focus the solution and adaptation for Côtes du Rhône because it's a partnership with Côtes du Rhône. So before we start, Philippe Palton, which is he's the president of Rhône, when he took over from Michel Chapoutier, he had a personal desire to really push forward the solution to adapt and mitigate climate change within the region. So the environment was already taking a lot of space, I would say, within Rhône mandate. But since Philippe Palton took over, I would say they went a step further. So we did a bunch of different videos when I went to visit, and also some of them sent me videos. So we're going to start with a video from Philippe Palton, who will express why the environment is important to him.
Philippe Pellaton, je suis viticulteur dans l'appellation Côtes du Rhône et également président de l'interprofession des vins de la Vallée du Rhône, appelé Inter-Rhône. Mes engagements en matière de respect de l'environnement sont importants et sont un élément très, très personnel qui m'a suivi tout au long de ma carrière. Donc je suis très très satisfait que Michel Bouffard puisse prendre la parole sur cette thématique et mettre à l'honneur tous les efforts qui sont faits dans notre belle région pour lutter contre le changement climatique et plus globalement la prise en compte de l'environnement dans l'appellation Côtes du Rhône. Alors le président d'Inter-Rhône a beaucoup de préoccupations, des préoccupations en matière de promotion, en matière économique, mais également effectivement en matière technique autour de ces grands sujets sociétaux, bien sûr. Aujourd'hui, il y a une demande de la société à prendre en compte ces éléments du contexte sociétal et d'évolution du changement climatique qui se traduit chez nous par des phénomènes assez puissants en matière de sécheresse l'été, de manque d'eau et j'allais dire des printemps assez doux également avec un vignoble qui se met à pousser un petit peu plus tôt. Donc notre vignoble subit les affres du climat. Donc il est important, et on le voit souvent des gels printaniers ou des sécheresses qui impactent le niveau quantitatif. Pour ça, on a des éléments pour lutter, on a notamment des éléments assurantiels, mais ce qui est important pour moi en la matière, à mon poste de président d'Inter-Rhône, c'est de maintenir une qualité dans la vendange, en fait, pour maintenir un profil de vin qui est adapté aux tendances de consommation, au goût du consommateur et à ce qu'on attend d'un Côte du Rhône aujourd'hui. Donc tous les éléments aujourd'hui que nous devons travailler n'ont pour but in fine que de satisfaire le consommateur. Donc bien sûr plusieurs axes de travail sont menés autour des cépages, des pratiques culturales également, voire de l'irrigation qui peut être mis en œuvre. Tout ceci de façon raisonnée pour, encore une fois, avoir un vignoble adapté. Alors la stratégie pour les appellations rhodaniennes s'inscrit d'abord dans une démarche connue en France sous le nom de RSE, la responsabilité sociétale des entreprises, qui est une démarche transversale qui embarque le vignoble, les metteurs en marché, mais également les administrations, l'institution, tout ce qui tourne autour de la filière viticole. Le but est de faire front commun face à ces grands enjeux qui sont pour nous, bien sûr, le respect de l'environnement, les problématiques de biodiversité et bien sûr ce qui nous impacte aujourd'hui, qui est le changement climatique. Donc bien sûr sur ces aspects environnementaux, l'appellation Côtes du Rhône a fait des efforts très importants dans ces dernières années, notamment autour de ces certifications. Plusieurs certifications existent en France, elles s'appellent haute valeur environnementale, d'autres labels je dirais plus privés. Également les démarches bio, aujourd'hui c'est à peu près 15% du vignoble des Côtes du Rhône qui est engagé en certification bio. Une forte production et proportion à l'augmentation existent également. Des aspects également paysagers et de biodiversité qui sont importants, donc il ne peut pas y avoir de biodiversité sans paysage, sans des éléments je dirais des éléments structurels historiques tels que la faune, la flore, également les murets en pierre sèche sont autant d'endroits où on peut retrouver je dirais de la biodiversité, donc c'est relativement important pour nous bien sûr. Et puis plus globalement, en fait, c'est de la recherche. Donc nous avons mis en place au sein de l'Institut rhodanien, l'Institut technique, des éléments de réflexion sur les cépages résistants. Donc, nous avons des cépages résistants aux maladies pour diminuer la quantité de traitement, mais également des cépages résistants face au changement climatique. Comment mes cépages résistent mieux. À titre d'exemple, les Côtes du Rhône ont intégré dans leur cahier des charges de nouveaux cépages qui sont sur des périodes de maturité un peu plus lointaines, donc une capacité à résister davantage à la sécheresse. Caladoc, Marcelan, pour citer ces deux cépages. Mais également, nous travaillons sur des choix de porte-greffes ou de clones qui nous permettent de redécaler en fait les dates de maturité. La force de notre appellation aujourd'hui, c'est sa capacité à être un vin d'assemblage. Voilà, on a plusieurs cépages dans notre belle appellation Côtes du Rhône et donc cette capacité à pouvoir avoir des cépages qui sont mûrs à des dates différentes et donc dans une évolution, une capacité à résister, à lutter contre ce changement climatique qui a tendance à nous faire vendanger de plus en plus tôt. Donc une force, je dirais, importante dans notre capacité à résister à ce changement climatique.
So we'll talk further today about what Interrhône, what Côtes du Rhône is doing to help producers adapt and mitigate climate change. But as Philippe was saying, one of the most important things is they're working with research center. So they have Institut Rhodanien, but within Institut Rhodanien, they have a department that is really dedicated to climate change. And they work with Institut de la Vigne et du Vin in Montpellier. So I met with them multiple times this year to really learn about all the research that they were doing. So we'll talk further about that today. But before we start, I thought it was going to be important to put into perspective a little bit where we are in the world in terms of the CO2 emission. So no doubt that the elevated CO2 that we see today is linked to the human activities, and this really speaks. You'll see the next images on that chart. You can see the growth in population. So you can see that between 1945 and 2022, we had a huge growth in population, and that's going to be even more by 2050. That's not only a problem for the elevated CO2 emission, which we'll see a graph next that shows us the increase of CO2 with the growth of population, but it also obviously brings some challenges, especially when we think of agriculture, the availability of water, and the challenge we are going to have to feed the population with the water resources that we have and the land space we have. And of course, when you look at all of that, it's hard to think that wine will be the priority when you need to feed the population. So in this graph, you can see the increase of CO2. People often say, well, you know, we've seen some in the past, we've seen some period where the heat was much more than it is today. If you look at Middle Age, for example, we know that the Middle Age was a period where we had some period of really elevated temperature. The thing is, in history, we never had such elevated CO2 in the atmosphere as we have today. And what's scary is that if you look at the last 40 years, the increase of CO2 has been so rapid, and if we continue this growth, some scientists even say that if we have the exact same growth in the next 40 years, that living on Earth will become a challenge. So 40 years is tomorrow. And, you know, it comes a point where there's a point of non-return. So we're behind, we're really behind, we have to catch up. And hopefully with this presentation today, you will leave not depressed, but empowered, because I really feel that if we all do something that we can turn around and have a land for tomorrow. So here you really show the correlation between the greenhouse gas emission and the industrial revolution. So of course they are closely linked. This figure comes from my book. So it comes from the IPCC, you might be familiar with it, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so basically what it did is it took the temperature and the rain between 1986 and 2005 and did a projection for 2081 till 2100 and see what it might look like. Of course, those are all projection. None of us know exactly what's going to happen. It's based on what we know today with the elevated CO2 emission. So you can look on the first figure, it's the heat, the increase in temperature with the degrees Celsius, and on the bottom you have the evolution of the rain. And we, you know, if you read different projection, they're all pretty much similar. So we know that there will be some areas where they have extreme heat, while other places will have more rain. So often we make a shortcut because we'd like it to be black and white. You know, the cool climate will benefit, the hot climate will suffer. It's not as simple as this, because I like to call it climate change or chaotic, right? It's the chaotic climate change. So it's chaos. So even if you're in an area where it might be slightly warmer, you might have extreme climatic challenges that happens where you have rain, hail, not at times that are beneficial for the vines. So it's not just whether the temperature will increase or decrease, or more rain or less. It's also the challenges, the chaos of the climate. So here it's kind of the amalgamation of different projection, what it might look like in the future based on what we know, and it kind of sums up the increase in temperature and the increase of rain. So we can see here that clearly some of the areas will be more impacted by heavy rain, while other areas will be more impacted by increase of temperature. And when we look at the solutions, there's two parts. There's one part which is mitigation. We all have a responsibility. We'll talk about that today. The responsibility we have as a sommelier, as a journalist, to give that information back to the consumer so that when they purchase a bottle of wine, they make the best decision they can to minimize the carbon footprint. And then the other part is adaptation. What can you do as a wine producer faced with all of those challenges to adapt? The good thing is the vine is resilient. So we'll look at different things we can do from what you choose before you plant the vineyard and all the way to our role that we all have as communicators. So when we talk about climate change, the first people who noticed what was happening was, of course, people work the land. I remember in 2005 when I was really started to get interested, I had just watched The Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore. And I was a bit traumatized by this documentary, and I started talking to producer about it. And even though there was not much information from the research center, when you talk to viticulturists, they all knew there was a change happening. In France, well, it was in 2003 that producer really noticed a big difference. And that was a bit of the turning point. I remember, I don't know if you remember, but in 2003, people were dying in France. It was dramatic. And if you talk to any producer, whether it's in Bordeaux, Burgundy, or Rhône, people say that the big turning point for them, a bit the wake-up call, they say, okay, this is just not climate, it's not just heat increasing, there's something big happening, and we feel that we just have a little bit of an idea by 2003 of what's going to become not once in a while, but every year. And that's what we're seeing now, is that what we saw in 2003, well, 2022 in the Rhône Valley, I have a producer, I did a video with him, and you'll see, but was longer heat and drought period than ever seen before, even worse than 2003. So what's happening? Well, the vine cycle is definitely disturbed. You're seeing some frost in areas that you haven't seen frost before. Frost is a problem in the southern Rhône Valley now. So you have to delay as much as you can the pruning. So hopefully you will save the vine from the frost. I was there in April this year, and producers were worried because it was getting below zero and the buds were all out. We also have a much shorter vegetative growth. So by the time, even if you delay the pruning, your grape ripen quicker, and so you have to harvest earlier. So the challenge is to have that balanced acidity without having too high sugar and still having the phenolic ripeness, because often you get really high sugar, but it's really hot in the summer, the vine shuts down, and you get to harvest time, your phenolics are not fully ripe. So that's definitely a challenge. Obviously, water stress. If you watched the news this year, if some of you were in France, people were limited to the amount of water they could use at the end of the summer because it was extreme drought. Of course, what it means in the wine, in the grapes, we have a drop of acidity, we have an increase in sugar, we have higher pH, which make it much more difficult for a microbial stability. So definitely challenging in the winery. And when we look at some charts and we look at the grapes that should thrive in some region, we see that we've already reached the maximum of what those grapes should be able to grow. So where are we going to go if we know that this increase in temperature is likely to keep on growing? So there's a lot of things that you can do, of course, before you plant, but once you've planted, you kind of have to deal with what you have. What's really interesting when you're talking to producers now is if you look at appellations, some areas that before were not maybe known as high quality because they were cooler, now they're benefiting. So it'll be really interesting to watch what's going to happen with the appellation. I don't think it's going to change tomorrow, but I think we might see a change in many years down the road. So for example, we always said that southeast exposure is best. Well, not anymore. We are seeing that northwest exposure are often best in some areas, especially in an area like the Rhône Valley. We'll talk about the soil today in the Rhône Valley, how the soil can help us, and we'll see that it's actually something that's helping in the southern Rhône Valley. Of course, the rainfall is needed. The problem with the rain is that it's not just whether, when you look at how much rain the vine needs in a year, it's more than that, is when does the rain fall? If you have no rain in the winter and it all falls in the summer, you might have the same amount of water during the year, but it's not going to do any good because you're not getting the rain at the right time. And this is also an issue when you're looking at, the projection of the rain in different wine regions. It's not just whether we're going to have rain, is how much rain falls and when does it fall. And we're going to talk about, of course, in the Rhône Valley, it's AOP, so there are some rules of which grapes you can plant. So even though we're doing experimentation with new grapes, it's not like if you're in Australia and you can start planting all bunch of new grapes and do whatever you want. It takes a bit longer for the INAO to accept new grapes within the appellation. Just as a reminder, if you look at the Rhône Valley, this is the annual average temperature over the last 20 years. So lots of sunshine. When you look at the rain, well, if you look at the last 20 years, the rain is not so bad. It's pretty good. We are going to look at what a vine needs for rain in a year. Usually it's between 500 to 1,500 millimeters of rain. So we're within that range. The problem is, I think we saw it in 2022, is that the rain is becoming more a problem. And when you talk to producers, the rain right now in the Rhône Valley is sometimes you don't have it in the winter, and that's when you want it. You want the soil to have to stock the water so that you have water in the summer when it's drier. The challenge right now is we're not always having that rain in the water. The Mistral wind is a good thing for the Rhône Valley. It's helping obviously to keep the mildew, the fungal disease down. So this is something that's beneficial. So this is interesting. So this is the harvest date in France. And so you can see that from the year below, it's starting to get earlier and earlier every year. So this year, the official date for harvest was August 22nd. But I talked to some of the producers, and they were harvesting some whites and rosé earlier in August, so the first week of August. But the official harvest date was declared the 22nd of August. That's early. Just as a reference, I was leading a master class in Montreal a couple weeks ago, and in 2013 some of the producers were harvesting in October. So it just gives you an idea, right, of change. So what does it mean? Well, the grape and the wine composition is changing. So in average in Côtes du Rhône we have 0.6 degrees Celsius increase, and we have an acidity that is lower. So we'll talk about more what it means in the winery in managing alcohol, acidity, and the options you can do also in the winery. So some of you might know Clos Bellan or La Ferme du Mont. So Stéphane Vedot is the owner of those two wineries. So I've asked Stéphane to do a little video for us because he's located in Valérias. So Valérias, if you remember your appellations in the Southern Rhône, Valérias is a Côtes du Rhône village, and it's at the very north of the southern part of the Rhône Valley. So he's more in the north part. So he's going to talk about the microclimate he has when we talk about ways to adapt. Altitude is one of the options that can help. So he'll talk about that, but I also asked him to tell us about this vintage we had in 2022, which was quite challenging for many producers.
Bonjour, bienvenue au Clos Bellan. Nous sommes au nord du sud du Rhône, sur des éboulis calcaires à 410 mètres d'altitude. On a des conditions parfaites pour avoir des maturités lentes et on est exposé plein est avec le Mont Ventoux qui est derrière et même légèrement au sud, ce qui indique vraiment qu'on est au nord du sud. Donc c'est un endroit qui a une particularité grâce à ces trois éléments qui sont l'altitude, le fait que ce soit calcaire et puis également l'exposition plein est. On a tous ces éléments qui nous permettent d'avoir des maturités qui sont, par exemple, sur ce millésime-là, décalées d'environ 3 semaines par rapport au sud du Rhône. Donc, le grand avantage de cette situation, si vous voulez, c'est d'avoir un véritable cycle phénolique très respectueux de la plante et du fruit, ce qui permet de libérer des composantes aromatiques très épicées, mais non cuites, non confites. Donc le clos, c'est ici environ 50 hectares de vignes sur différents cépages, ainsi qu'une soixantaine de ruches, une petite forêt avec quelques chênes truffiers, et puis l'ensemble forme un clos, puisque légalement on a l'obligation de respecter certains critères pour pouvoir l'appeler clos. Donc ça nous permet vraiment de travailler en bio et en biodynamie sans avoir d'impact négatif du voisinage. Le millésime est particulièrement intéressant cette année, compte tenu des changements ou de cette continuité dans le changement du climat, parce que on a eu une vague de chaleur quasiment sans précédent. Même 2003, c'était moins long que ça. Et on se retrouve avec, pour la plupart des vignerons du sud du Rhône, et je pense que ça touche aussi d'autres régions, avec une dégradation significative de l'acidité et des concentrations qui arrivent très vite. Et pour un certain nombre de vignobles ou de parties de vignobles, des phénomènes de blocage phénolique. Ici, ça n'a pas été le cas, pour les raisons que je vous ai expliquées. Ça nous permet aussi d'avoir une pluviométrie qui est favorable, avec le nord et des blocages de nuages avec les reliefs. Ça permet d'avoir des précipitations localisées plus intéressantes. Ça, ce sont des événements essentiels aujourd'hui. Ce qu'on essaye de faire ici, en plus de ces conditions naturelles, c'est de concentrer avec le maximum d'équipes possible notre taille en mars et avril, c'est-à-dire bien plus tard que la plupart des gens. Ça permet ainsi de ralentir la nature un tout petit peu, bien qu'elle se charge de récupérer une partie de ce retard qu'on lui presque impose en taillant tard. Elle le rattrape en partie, mais pas complètement, donc ça nous aide beaucoup. Et puis ensuite, le travail des sols sur les calcaires pour redonner de la vie avec différentes espèces de céréales, par exemple, et puis d'herbes, de végétaux, permet d'avoir des bulbes à différentes profondeurs. Ça retient un peu plus l'humidité. Ensuite, on va coucher, comme vous pouvez le voir, on va coucher les herbes pour qu'il y ait un contrôle de l'évaporation optimal et éviter d'avoir trop de sécheresse en surface. Et puis, bien évidemment, tout ce travail du sol en biodynamie et en bio permet de créer une vie organique dans les sols, qui renvoie plus d'énergie dans les plantes, qui elles-mêmes peuvent ainsi ne pas trop stresser. Donc, au final, et sur l'ensemble du vignoble, on se retrouve avec des acidités qui restent magnifiques, avec des pH qui tournent. Si on veut le faire d'une façon très simple, on va dire que ce sont des pH de blanc, mais sur des rouges. Et c'est même cette année plus bas, avec des acidités totales plus hautes, mais c'est surtout des pH très bas, parce que c'est grâce au sol où nous nous retrouvons avec des architectures de profil très minérales, très verticales, sur lesquelles on peut s'appuyer pour avoir cette richesse que l'on a en Vallée du Rhône. Travail ensuite, c'est la cave et de bénéficier de cette fraîcheur qui, sans levurage sur ce millésime-là, va nous permettre d'extraire de façon très équilibrée, très fine, très élégante les jus. Voilà, donc millésime 2022, en règle générale, vous allez avoir des surprises sur les acidités. C'est un gros millésime sur certains cépages, comme en Grenache, par exemple, cette année. Les vionniers donnent pas mal. Ensuite, les autres cépages sont bien aussi. C'est une belle année pour tous ceux qui n'ont pas été touchés. Malheureusement, ici, j'ai eu un peu de grêle, mais les vignes restent quand même magnifiques avec des inflorescences et un redépart absolument inespéré. Je pense que c'est en partie grâce aux soins que l'on prend des vignes et depuis tellement d'années. Voilà. Vous aurez l'occasion sur ce millésime-là de découvrir quelques nouvelles cuvées qui représentent une belle petite équation, une espèce de petit univers qui rassemble la salinité, la gourmandise, la douceur, avec des derniers tiers, milieu de bouche, qui auront toujours ce petit cran minéral de cette exposition est en altitude sur le nord du Rhône, pour la partie sud en tout cas. Voilà. Très bonne découverte pour vous. J'espère que vous avez compris. N'hésitez pas à revenir directement vers le domaine si vous voulez plus d'informations. À bientôt. Au revoir. Bonne journée.
If you have a chance to try his wines, we don't have them today, but it's really interesting. Sometimes when you look at his alcohol level in the wine, I've had some rosé in some years at 12.5. So that fact that he's pruning much later, the way he's working the land, it's really interesting to look sometimes at his alcohol level, which is much lower than other places, and of course that northern part also helps.
Bonjour.
Whoops. That gives you an idea of the vintage 2022, which I thought it was really important to talk about in the context of climate change. We're going to talk about the grapes now. The positive thing for the Rhône Valley, for Côtes du Rhône, is that they have a lot of different grapes. I always like to put that in perspective. So according to OIV, there are 6,000 grapes in the world, but 13 of them cover 1/3 of the world vineyards and 33 cover half. That leaves for a lot of exploration, lots. If that interests you, at my last conference in Montreal, I had Jose Williamos, that you might know. He wrote Wine Grapes with Jancis Robinson. He was a speaker at my conference in 2019. I have the video on my website, and he did a whole presentation on that. It's really worth looking at. You can watch the video, but you know, one of the things he talks about is before starting looking to create new grapes, we have to look at what we already have, because not only we have all of those grapes, within each of those grapes, we are doing a lot of research, and we need to do even more research on the clone that exists. On Grenache, for example, so far we have found 500 different clones, and we're still doing research, so we know there's probably more than just 500. So within what we have a lot of opportunities. The other thing too is we know that in the Middle Age, it was a period of time where the heat was much higher on Earth. And we know also that some of the grapes have disappeared after that phylloxera, because those grapes could not really ripen easily So we stopped focusing on that. It's one of the reasons, for example, Miguel Torres, which is not obviously in the Rhone Valley, he's in Spain, but he knew that, and that's why he started to do some research on all of those grapes in Catalonia, that he knew once upon a time we had much more different grapes, but they disappeared because they could not ripen in this time. But now those grapes are providing a really, really good resource. So the good news is in the Rhone Valley, we have lots of different grapes, and even though Grenache is really suited, there are some grapes that we used to use before in the blends that we kind of left aside. And now we're going back to them and saying, wait a second, Carignan and Counoise actually ripen later. They preserve acidity, and they are quite suited to this heat that we're seeing increase. It's interesting. One of the first person I talked to when I started to get interested on climate change was Thomas Perrin from the Perrin family, and already in the early 2000s, the Perrin family was telling me that in the southern Rhone, when the vine of Syrah was dying, they were replacing with Counoise because they could already see that Syrah was starting to suffer a little bit from heat. Now, everyone is talking about it, but Perrin was talking about it way before it became common knowledge. The other thing, too, when you talk to producers, if we keep with the reds, Mourvèdre. A lot of people are saying, well, Mourvèdre used to be a bit difficult to ripen in some parts. Now, we like Mourvèdre. It's actually doing well. So some people are exploring with that. So Philippe, in his little introduction, talked about two new grapes getting allowed in Côtes du Rhône, which is Caladoc and Marcelin. So that's a change. So what the Rhône, the Syndicat de Côtes du Rhône is doing a partnership with Institut Rhodanien, and so they're planting different grapes and experimenting and observing which grapes within what it's already allowed do better. But also they're planting some new grapes and kind of exploring. They're exploring with non-French wines. I know they're exploring with other grapes that are from Greece and other places, Italian. But really what they want to focus on is the French grape, because they know they already have all of those grapes that they could use without changing really the profile, because they're really meant for the region, and they used to have those grapes in a higher percentage in terms of the planting. They also have Couston that they are now using. So it's a cross. I didn't heard about Couston before, so I asked what it was when they told me. Couston is a cross between Grenache and Aubin, but it's also one of the grapes that is being used again in the blend. When we talk about weights, Bourgoulin, Picpoul, those are grapes that are allowed, but I'll show you in a bit the percentage of plantings of different grapes. You'll see, even though we know those grapes, they're not planted much. They remain a very small percentage of the planting. So the idea is to say, okay, maybe we go back to these grapes. Maybe we plant more Bourgoulin. Maybe we plant more Picpoul. Maybe a Clairette also people are looking at Clairette once again. Beautiful grape that resists really, really well to the high temperature. Cinsault, I didn't talk about Cinsault, but Cinsault extremely adapted as well. Brun Argenté, also known as Vaccarès. Maybe you know Vaccarès. So same grape. Also a grape that preserves its acidity quite well. So again, quite adapted to the change in temperature. So I like this because we don't see I'll show you something that you look more at the percentage of the grapes, but you can see that today Grenache is still the king. And this is a good news because Grenache is adapted. It thrives even in really drought condition, in extreme condition. Grenache is happy. It's not like Syrah that's more sensitive. Grenache is happy. But if you look here, you have the breakdown of surface by grape. So you can see Grenache, Syrah. So it'll be interesting to follow the evolution of those percentage as we start looking at different options. Because as I was saying, even though we talk about Marcelin, well, it's 1.1%. If you look at Clairette Rose, if you look at Clairette, 1%. Counoise, 0.23%. So those grapes we're looking at for solutions still are in very small percentage. So I think with time, we will start to see that percentage of planting slightly different. So I have a question for you. Who in the room think that in general, old vines are a bit more fragile? Well, it's interesting because if you had a whole panel of different people, I'm talking about producers, they will have slightly different answers, right? Some people think that old vines are actually more fragile, they're more sensitive to diseases. But there's actually a gentleman who did his PhD on old vines, specifically on Shiraz. His name is Dylan Criggs, he's in Australia. I invite you to go online and look and watch his videos. And every preconceived idea we have about old vines is not true. Actually, it's not necessarily that old vines are more sensitive to disease. It has a lot to do with how you prune the vine, to whether it's going to be stronger or not. But if you actually do a good job by pruning the vine properly, an old vine actually is going to be more resistant to diseases and more adapted to change. Why? Because you have a higher level of carbohydrate within the vine. And so when you have more carbohydrate within the vine, and it's a bit more complex than that, I'm just kind of giving you the big, kind of an easy understanding. But if you want to go and look further, look for Dylan Criggs, and explains more at length. But usually, yeah, if you prune your vine properly, and this is a beautiful 100 years old vine Clairette at Château Montfaucon that you might know. And if you talk to Rodolphe Despins, the owner, he tells you exactly what Rodolphe tells you. Actually, old vines are not necessarily less productive. And if you prune them well and they're healthy, they will live long and they actually will be more resistant to disease, to drought, and therefore climate change. So Rodolphe did a little bit of video about what he's seeing from old vine in his vineyard. He has some of the oldest Clairette in Côtes du Rhône. So he wanted to share with you what he has observed with old vines and the way they resist.
Hello, welcome in Montfaucon. We are in Montfaucon Cellar, and today we will talk about climate change. We have to face those recent years, like in the 17, 19, 20, 22. Those years were quite extreme with warmer temperature and less rain, so severe drought. And I have realized that our old vineyards were more adapted, were better resistant to face these difficult conditions, extreme conditions. I think there's many reasons for that, and probably the first one, the main one, will be they have a deeper and a bigger root stock system. The vines, the rootstock explore all along the soil and look for the minerals and the water they need for the growth. Also, usually the old vineyards produce less. They have lower yield, and it's of course easier to carry than a big productions to make that those grapes ripen. And another reason would be that year to year they are more constant. There's not a big variation every year, compared to young vineyards, which are very vigorous, lots of yield. So it's in case of a severe drought, it's hard to carry all those grapes to the end. Another effect will be the quality of the material vegetal. I mean that most of these old vineyards have been selected by mass selections. So the people were, by observance, taking the best individual among many of them. So you really have a diversity of genetics and vineyards. Compared to, now there's a lot of clone, and this is poorer and probably have less adaptation to drought. And it's exactly the same thing also for the wood stock. Another point will be the way how the vineyards were grafted. In the old days, they were using the English grafting, opposed to now, most of the vineyards are made with the omega grafting. And we know that with the English grafting, you have a better junctions, so the plant works better, and we can imagine that in case of difficult conditions, severe conditions, if the plant works better, it will resist better. So that's, I think, an important point. Also, I think experience could be also in an answer. When the vines are older, they have faced many different season, climate, and difficulties, and they probably acquired knowledge how to adapt themselves. So in the case of heat and lack of water, they probably slow down, limit their evapotranspirations, limit their growth, close their stomach, and go into this survival time, like a kind of hibernation, but in the summer, because it's very difficult conditions. And it's a way for them to go through, and that I call that experience and wisdom. This is all what I think, and this can be moderate, of course, in our area by the type of soil we have. We have many different types of soil, and the amount of clay could be an answer where we can see variations, because clay have a better water reserve potential. But also the type of the vineyards. We have many varietals like Grenache, and some are very well adapted to resist naturally to drought, like Grenache, Carignan, Cinsault, Counoise, Clairette, Bourboulin for the whites. So yes, I think we've been around quite a bit. And I thank you for your attention, and I hope it helps you. And cheers.
We'll come back to grafting in a little bit, because it's a big part of making the vine stronger. So it's not just whether the vine is old or not, it's how we carry the vine till that point. And so we talked about grapes, old vines, and now I wanted to talk about the future of hybrids. And we know there's hybrids have existed for a long time, right? We started to do some research on hybrids in the 19th century. But it's interesting to look at hybrids now, even though we've been experimenting with hybrids, still today they only represent 4.4% of the planting in the world. So I think it's interesting to put that into perspective, because I don't think that tomorrow hybrids are going to be the thing that we plant, right? I think we just have to look at that as one of the many solutions. So when we talk about hybrids, the conversation is always whether, okay, So the hybrids we know in the past that were created, let's say, to survive winter, those were known more as monogenic. So those vines were created to kind of adapt to one specific thing. So polygenic are the new wave of hybrids, if you want. So what we've done is we've took Vitis vinifera with an Asian or American vine, and we do a crossing. And then we're going to do the crossing multiple times moreover with vinifera, so that the idea is we have more of the vinifera taste, but we also give the chance of the vine to be polygenic, meaning able to resist to multiple things. So we do that. So the reasons we're creating those new hybrids is a lot to do with fungal diseases that are increasing. And so the idea, if we have a polygenic hybrids, the vine has more chance to resist to those disease mutation. Because we know, we've started with COVID, we are now at I don't know how many variants. So diseases mutate. So if you build a vine now that is polygenic to resist to specific things, well, with time, perhaps those diseases will find a way in. They will mutate and adapt. And that is why a lot of people are not convinced about hybrids. Some people go, yay, hybrids. There's even an association called PWE. You can find lots of information online that really promote the hybrids. According to, there was something in, I think it was in the Institut de la Vigne et du Vin, they were saying that currently in France, they estimate that 80% of the synthetic products that are used are for fungal diseases. And if we use hybrids, we would reduce this to zero, basically. It's not as simple as this, because with time, as I was saying, the diseases will mutate and probably find a way back in. I've talked to producers in Italy who have planted some of those plants 20 years ago, and already they're starting to increase the treatments because the vine is starting to lose the resistance because it has mutated. I've also talked to people who've planted hybrids, and just in 3 years, I asked them, well, do you use fungicide to spray? And they say, yes, you cannot, it's not like zero spray. You will still need to spray, especially at flowering, but you don't spray as much. So I would say the jury is still out on hybrids, depending on who you talk to, because of this concern that the disease will mutate and it might not be a good long term, but could be one of the solutions that we can look at. So in Côtes du Rhône, they are planted, they didn't want to plant everything, so they have chosen Floréal and Vidocq, which are two hybrids. And they are, with Institut Rhodanien, they're looking closely how those evolving, the taste of the wine profile. Have any of you tried some of those 100% Vidocq or Floréal? If you go to France, you'll find sometimes, I've had a few 100% Floréal. I've had Floréal in blends on IGP. They're not under AOP. It's interesting, but the vines are young. So it's kind of hard to find a conclusion. It's early, but Côtes du Rhône is open to those and exploring that as one of the solutions. The other thing that's interesting in Côtes du Rhône is there are currently 2 ongoing research. What they're doing, they are doing a crossing with a resistant variety and crossing it with Syrah or Grenache, which are 2 important grapes within Côtes du Rhône. So they have 50 vines planted in experimental vineyard. But all of this will take time. So they say, well, the first plant are expected in about 20 years because it takes a long time to observe, to look at what really works. So again, it's giving yourself all of the you have to be open-minded and try everything and see at the end what will be most suitable and what kind of tools will you be able to use. And so when we're looking at those, we're looking at drought resistant, of course, because it's an issue in Côtes du Rhône, and also disease resistant. And also, we're doing a lot of research on rootstock. I have a beautiful video of Lilian Briand, which is one of the best nursery in the world. He's located in the Rhône Valley. He will talk more about that, but everyone agrees that rootstock, we need more research in rootstock. There's not that many rootstock used in France. So we need to do more research on the type of rootstock and also maybe change the rules so we can do sélection massale on rootstock, because today sélection massale is still not allowed on rootstock, just on grapes. So I don't know about you, but in my wine career, I always learned about rootstock for phylloxera. Of course, I knew it was important for some disease, it had an impact on yield, on type of ripening. But I was missing some gap in terms of the role of the rootstock and the grafting process. And when I met Lilian Briand, do anyone in the room know Lilian Briand? So Sarah, yes, because you've been to the Rhône. So Lilian Briand is the most famous, like everyone in the world would like to work with him. He works with Cheval Blanc, Bise Lalou, all the Chave, everyone works with him. If you want to do the best work, and I've actually talked to producer in Côtes du Rhône who used to work with other nursery, and since they use his plants, his planting material, they see huge difference in the vine's strength. And so the rootstock plays a major role. I was just in the Rhône Valley last week, and a producer said to me, we used to plant specific type of rootstock, and now I'm really exploring other types, like Rupestris lot, Rupestris du lot, that we used to plant before, but we kind of let go, and I'm finding now that actually those are really helpful for drought. So it's about looking at all of the rootstock out there and looking again, okay, what I'm using now, is it still the right rootstock for our region? Perhaps we have to relook at this. Of course, it's a long-term vision because you cannot replant overnight. It's going to cost too much. But when a vine dies, it's about replanting with new rootstock. The next video I am going to show is longer, is 10-15 minutes. Lilian is fantastic. I work with Lilian on some projects, and he accepted to do a video with professionals, which lasts 15 minutes. But really, when I go to the Rhône Valley, I often spend an entire day with him. I learn so much. If you have a chance to go to the Rhône Valley, email me. I will put you in touch with him. He's done an amazing video. It's going to give you a bit of an idea of the important role a nursery has, because I think in the wine industry, we don't talk enough about that. What is the role of a nursery? How important is it? Well, it starts there. Everything starts there, right?
J'ai la chance vraiment au démarrage d'avoir cette information-là. Parce que je n'ose pas imaginer un vigneron qui a des cèpes qui ont plus de 30 ans et qui voit tout en train de s'effriter et qui mordicus, lui, c'est oui, mais je vais continuer à traiter, continuer à trouver me fournir en planche, et même pépiniériste qui te fournit des clones et ainsi de suite. Et aujourd'hui, le monde nous appelle à la responsabilité, quoi, collective. Tu poses un acte, mais il faut un acte responsable.
Moi, je vais t'aider, je vais t'accompagner, on va parler de diversité, on va parler de porte-greffes et de préparation des sols. Mais c'est ton bec, c'est pas le mien. Moi, je suis pas le consultant qui veut marquer son passage. C'est ton bec.
Je suis Lilian Briand, j'ai 50 ans, je suis papa de 2 grands garçons, dont l'un, Marius, qui va avoir 18 ans, qui va reprendre l'activité parce que mon métier, c'est pépiniériste viticole. Ce métier consiste à produire des plans pour les vignerons. Un vigneron qui doit planter de la vigne, bien de temps en temps, il y a de la mortalité ou il y a des vignes qu'il faut complètement renouveler. Et là, ils font appel à des pépiniéristes viticoles. Mon entreprise est basée dans le sud de la France. Voilà, je produis des plants. Et là, nous sommes au milieu d'une pépinière de 2,5 millions de plants. C'est notre production annuelle. Je suis un paysan, je suis un fils et un petit-fils de pépiniériste. Et mes parents et mes grands-parents m'ont appris à travailler la terre, à piocher, à conduire des tracteurs, à régler des outils, à planter de la vigne, à faire des travaux plus précis comme le greffage par exemple. Je me suis nourri de tout ça et j'ai pu du coup construire petit à petit mon avenir. Je ne m'en suis pas aperçu à l'époque, mais je me suis construit comme ça. Il y a un épisode intéressant qui a duré 6 ans. J'ai été donc président des pépiniéristes du Vaucluse et vice-président au niveau national, ce qui m'a permis de rencontrer tous les acteurs de la filière, du petit pépiniériste au plus gros, qui fait des dizaines de millions de plants. J'ai appris à connaître l'administration, la recherche et tous les travaux dans lesquels elles s'étaient engagées.
Clap. Silence.
Quand je me suis installé, je voulais être vigneron. Et puis très vite, j'ai découvert ce métier de la pépinière qui m'a plu. Il a fallu faire un choix et j'ai choisi la pépinière tout en gardant cet objectif de faire du vin un jour. Je suis un passionné de vin et j'explique à Marius que je ne vois pas comment il peut être un grand pépiniériste si il n'aime pas le milieu du vin, de la viticulture. D'ailleurs, en ce moment, il fait les vendanges chez mon meilleur ami qui est Jérôme Bressy à Rasteau. On a créé une équipe, toute une équipe de collaborateurs à tous les niveaux qui ont une passion, la même que la mienne, la passion de ce milieu du vin et du milieu du végétal. La plus belle des récompenses, c'est de se retrouver dans la cour intérieure chez Jean-Louis Chave à discuter autour de la table de projets, de diversité, de porte-greffes, de vigueur des plants, de durabilité. Laurent Vaillé de la Grange des Pères disait « Lilian, c'est bien de vinifier, c'est super, on peut avoir un super matériel, mais le plus important, c'est le végétal. » Parce que, cher sommelier, sachez-le, si on ne réagit pas, les vignes rajeuniront petit à petit, parce qu'il y a un gros problème de dépérissement, dû en effet au dérèglement climatique, mais pas que. Hein, le vigneron a aussi une grosse part de responsabilité dans la situation de son vignoble, et il faut que vous soyez conscient que la responsabilité d'un pépiniériste, elle est énorme, car elle permettra de livrer un végétal d'une grande qualité auprès des vignerons qui, après, à leur tour, pourront faire des grands vins.
Voilà, ici, moi, je complante systématiquement. Donc, on a eu des counoises, on a eu des courvèdres, beaucoup de grenache, parce que la vigne, à la base, c'était 100% de grenache.
On a engagé avec certains une véritable réflexion, un partenariat. J'aime beaucoup parler de Madame Bise, Lalou Bise-Leroy, qui nous a demandé, alors qu'elle va bientôt avoir 90 ans, qui nous a demandé de l'accompagner pour 30 ans. Beaucoup de vignerons nous interpellent, des vignerons avec qui on travaille généralement. Ils sont surpris, ils ne comprennent pas pourquoi leurs vieilles vignes, qui sont quelquefois centenaires, continuent de pousser, de produire. Il y a un peu de mortalité, mais on accepte une mortalité sur un cep qui a une centaine d'années. Par contre, là où ils ne comprennent pas, c'est que les vignes qui ont 10, 15, 20 ans dépérissent très vite et il n'est pas rare aujourd'hui de voir des vignes entières qui sont arrachées au bout de 20-25 ans. Et donc, on va avoir un rajeunissement du vignoble, un effet terroir qu'on ne retrouvera pas. La qualité des vins va changer et je dirais que c'est dramatique pour une viticulture de qualité.
Et là, je vais planter un peu de principal, je vais faire grenache. Et essayer de faire,
Quand vous implantez une vigne, il faut que les sols soient reposés, soient bien préparés. Sur cette parcelle-là, à Châteauneuf-du-Pape, On est sur une plantation qui a été faite là il y a quelques mois, qui a un très beau développement. Cette parcelle a été plantée sur des sols où il y a eu 5 ans de repos, avec une véritable réflexion sur les couverts végétaux avant la plantation, parce qu'on s'aperçoit que les préparations superficielles, ça ne marche pas. C'est préconisé, mais ça ne fonctionne pas. Il y a les fondations d'une vigne, c'est son système racinaire. Si on veut mettre les vignes à l'abri des conditions climatiques qui sont terribles, il faut que la vigne fasse des racines. Et pour faire des racines, il faut que les sols soient souples et soient travaillés en profondeur. Et après, c'est parti. C'est exactement ce qui s'est passé sur cette propriété. La viticultrice a soigné la préparation des sols, a soigné son entretien. Une jeune vigne ne doit pas être en concurrence avec de l'herbe. Dans le sol, il y a une vie, il y a une concurrence racinaire qui s'installe. Donc, je préconiserais des densités vraiment revues à la baisse. Quels sont les autres leviers? Le choix des porte-greffes, le choix des cépages. Il y a des variétés qui, dans certaines régions, doivent être mises soit en altitude, soit sur des versants nord, parce qu'elles souffrent trop des conditions climatiques et surtout de ces sécheresses. Donc il y a toute une réflexion à avoir sur le végétal.
Sur des plantations que je réalise sur les Côtes du Rhône, je replante en gobelet.
Un gobelet.
Ouais, parce qu'on voit l'effet protection du feuillage pour la chaleur et d'autres avantages. C'est vrai qu'on voit une évolution climatique nette. Mon grand-père, vendangeait moi début octobre. Mon père, on ne commençait jamais avant le 20 septembre. Aujourd'hui, à certains millésimes, le 20 septembre, on a fini les vendanges. Donc c'est vrai qu'en l'espace de 3 générations, on voit une évolution climatique qui est indéniable.
Là, nous sommes au milieu d'une parcelle de vignes composée d'une diversité énorme. En fait, notre quotidien, chaque année, à partir du mois d'août, consiste à aller visiter des vieux vignobles qui ne sont pas clonés, histoire de marquer et de suivre pendant 2 à 3 années des individus qui sont dans un état sanitaire irréprochable, impensable de pouvoir multiplier du végétal et livrer à la viticulture des plants de vigne s'il n'y a pas de garantie sanitaire. Aujourd'hui, plus de 95% de la production européenne est faite à partir de clones. Donc on a tué la diversité. Et par rapport aux problèmes climatiques, une des solutions, c'est aussi d'amener de la diversité. On a sur notre propriété 12 hectares, on aura bientôt 20 hectares, riches de milliers et de dizaines de milliers d'individus différents qui nous permettent de produire des plants de belle qualité.
Cinsault, Syrah, Grenache, il y a de tout. Donc l'idée c'est de compléter à la plantation pour qu'il y ait un mariage, une affinité à la naissance. Au bout de 10 ans, après, il y a une impulsion la floraison, on le va ensemble. Donc, ça nous permet de récolter tout ensemble. Donc, c'est là où on dépasse l'effet cépage.
Et tout un vignoble est comme ça.
Oui, il faut être patient aussi. Parce que si on veut de la récolte trop rapidement, on n'a pas un système racinaire assez développé. Du coup, ça passe moins la sécheresse, donc c'est tout un ensemble. Il n'y a pas que le changement climatique, il y a aussi le travail du vigneron qui est devant pour moi. Donc, pour faire un grand vin, il faut quand même prendre des risques et être à la limite.
Pas un bon vin.
Voilà. Un grand vin. Différent. Bon vin, il y en a beaucoup.
Un plant de vigne est composé d'un greffon, d'un cépage, mais aussi d'un porte-greffe. Le porte-greffe, c'est la partie qui va être plantée dans le sol. Ce porte-greffe va lancer les racines. Quand on construit une vigne et son système racinaire, c'est à partir du porte-greffe. Il existe à peu près 25 variétés de porte-greffes différentes qu'on proposera aux vignerons en fonction de la nature du sol. Ici, nous sommes sur une parcelle c'est du fer-cal, une variété qui résiste au calcaire. Et on a décidé, ça fait plus de 15 ans, de palisser. Donc là, on a une vigne mère de porte-greffe qu'on a palissée pour pas mettre de chimie, pour travailler les sols. On voit le travail des équipes, un travail manuel. On a enherbé pour amener de la diversité, on est pour la biodiversité. Donc voilà, je pense qu'on est vraiment dans la définition d'un vignoble de belle qualité. Ça représente quand même plus de 30 hectares de vignes mères de porte-greffe, ce qui nous permettra de produire suffisamment pour greffer nos 2,5 millions de plants. arrive une période extrêmement importante, le mois de mars, qui marque le début du greffage. Le greffage consiste à assembler le cépage, le greffon, sur le porte-greffe. Cette étape chez nous est très longue. Elle dure 7 à 8 semaines. Pourquoi est-ce que c'est long? Parce qu'en fait, on utilise des vieilles machines, des vieux outils qui datent des années 40, des années 50. Et cette technique consiste à fendre le greffon, à fendre le porte-greffe et l'emboîter manuellement. Un plan bien soudé, c'est un plan qui va bien pousser chez le vigneron et qui pourra faire ses racines qui vont s'installer en profondeur durablement. Et là, on pourra, on sera armé, je dirais, pour affronter avec encore un peu plus d'efficacité les conditions climatiques qui mettent la vigne en difficulté. Voilà, donc la greffe est pour moi l'étape la plus importante dans la production d'un plant de vigne.
Alors d'abord on va goûter sur des cubes. Parce que c'est pas le côté gras, opulent. C'est des vieilles vignes, je te donnerai pas l'âge, c'est pas des vignes qui ont 50-60 ans, c'est un peu plus jeune. Mais c'est justement pour ça qu'on travaille avec toi, c'est pour aller rechercher une diversité génétique parce que c'est ce qui manque sur ces parcelles-là.
Une fois le greffage terminé, on arrive fin avril, ces plants sont prêts à être mis en terre sur des sols qui auront reposé. Parce que la particularité de notre pépinière, c'est qu'on a la chance d'avoir un foncier conséquent et on a la possibilité de préparer les sols bien à l'avance avec une réflexion sur le couvert végétal. Voilà, donc les sols sont vraiment reposés et ça c'est très important pour la qualité du plant. Donc une fois que l'hiver arrive, les plants sont retirés du sol, ils sont triés et on vérifie la qualité du point de greffe, la qualité de la soudure. On vérifie ce bon développement de la végétation et également du système racinaire.
Tu vois qu'à 6 mètres sous terre, on voit des racines en fait. Ouais. Dans ces sols de safre, donc sol de safre, si tu touches, tu vois que ça tombe. Ouais. C'est le sable qui s'est compacté, mais on voit que les racines, elles arrivent vraiment. Donc on sait que les 5-6 premières années sur ce type de sol, la vigne souffre un peu l'été, mais au bout de 8 ans, elles ont développé un système racinaire qui fait qu'elles s'affranchissent complètement de la contrainte hydrique.
Voilà un jeune et beau plant de vigne. Ça, c'est le fruit de notre travail. Alors, il pourra vivre seulement 2-3 ans si les itinéraires techniques ne sont pas respectés. Il peut par contre vivre 80 ou 100 ans. Si vraiment il y a une prise de relais de la part du vigneron, ça pourra donner donc des vignes centenaires, des grands vins que vous, chers amis sommeliers, vous pourrez proposer autour de votre table.
De quelle qualité parle-t-on? Est-ce que c'est une qualité virtuelle ou qu'est-ce que c'est que la démarche qualité? Mais la démarche qualité, elle se fait en amont, dans son approche. Et si tu veux avoir du bon vin, mais il faut respecter... Donc finalement, j'ai de la chance d'être au démarrage, feuille blanche. Parce que je ne pourrais pas dire que je ne savais pas.
C'est vrai.
Je ne pourrais pas dire que je ne savais pas.
Oh, il est bien le clap.
Here we go. Did you learn a little bit something there? If you have a chance to go, he also wrote a book for those who speak French. The book was about why are the vineyards dying much earlier than they were in the past. And Rodolphe Despins from Mon Faucon talked about Omega versus the English way to graft, right? And that's what he's doing. When he's doing the manual grafting, it's the English. And it's much easier for the vine to actually to have the right, I'm thinking in French, soudure. Fusion, thank you, the right fusion. And the other thing he did not mention is most nursery, when they actually graft, when you get the plants out, they reject about 20% of the plants because they did not have that proper fusion. He rejects 50%, even though after all of he does. So next time you go see a producer, ask them what they do for grafting, because once you start thinking about that, and that's where it starts in the context of climate change. If you have a vine that was not grafted properly, that is not strong enough, when comes the drought, the diseases, then you're going to be in a very difficult situation. So talking about water management, vines, of course, needs water. You need it for photosynthesis, you need it for nutrients intake, And the quantity you need is based on what we call evapotranspiration, right? Evapotranspiration is the combination of the water you're losing through the surface of the land and the water you're losing through the transpiration of the vine. And the good news is you actually can measure how much evapotranspiration you have. And in the Rhône Valley, we did not always measure just because we could not really irrigate, right? We'll talk about derogation in a second, and irrigation, we have more and more derogation. But this is where we have a lot to learn with countries like Australia and California, where they could irrigate, but water is becoming extremely scarce and expensive. So they're using some instrument to measure what the actual water availability is in the soil and in the plant. And by doing that, people are realizing that sometimes by the time you see a vine struggling because of heat, it's too late. And often, when you don't see anything, you anticipate what's coming, and in fact, you might have more water availability in the soil and the plant than you think. If you talk to producer in Australia, I've talked quite a bit to Dylan Griggs, actually. I was telling you, as a PhD on old vine. I talked to him quite a bit about that because he consults in the vineyard. And he basically used instrument to measure the stomata conductance, the soil, the water in the soil moisture. And he says, you know, we realize where we can irrigate, in some places we actually reduce the amount of water we use for irrigation because we realize, in fact, the vine did not need as much as we thought. The opposite is true. You might anticipate and see that the vine actually needs more than you think. So using those instruments, whether it's the pressure chamber to monitor the water stress of the vine, the porometer to use the leaf stomatal conductance, or probes to measure the soil moisture, all of that gives you a reading. Do my vine really need water? And that comes important when we talk about irrigation. In France, we cannot irrigate, but more and more every year, the producer can ask for a derogation. So now if you go in the Rhône Valley, you will see most vineyards are set up for irrigation. Some people resist, but a lot of people are set up for irrigation so that if they need derogation and they are granted derogation, they will irrigate in the summer because the drought is becoming increasingly important. So it's an interesting change because the old world kind of always looked down on the new world saying, well, they irrigate, we don't irrigate. Well, it comes a point where the vine die. I've talked to producers who in extreme heat, they have lost vine. The vines have died. So at which point, you want to be sustainable. Sustainable is also economical. So interesting to think that 83% of the world's vineyard is irrigated. So that being said, even though you can irrigate in years where you might have a derogation, you really need to be careful on how much, not to rely too much on that, because we saw in South Africa in 2018, 2019, if you remember Cape Town, the agriculturists, I'm not even talking about viticulturists, the agriculturists were told not to irrigate cereal anymore because Cape Town, the town didn't have water. So people were limited to the amount of water they could use to drink, to wash, and people who were growing cereal could not irrigate. So no need to tell you that vine comes last in priority. We saw this year in France for the first time in the Rhône Valley, people were told they had a maximum amount of water they could use per day in the summer for their own personal use, and you would actually get charged a fine if you're using more than that. So what I'm saying is that those instruments I'm talking about are important to read what the vine needs so that if you can irrigate, you're really only using it as needed. But before that, there's a lot of things you can do to minimize water usage. Cover crop. And that's a big change for the Rhône Valley, for Côtes du Rhône. It's dry, it's drought. We always thought that, cover crops will be just too much competition for the vine. So, you would have bare ground. It's a big switch. And every year, the Syndicat des Côtes du Rhône, what they do, they actually look at, they will put forward, they do a lot of different things, but every year they will take 2 actions that they really want to promote and give research to the producer. In 2022, those 2 things were agroforesterie, which we'll talk about, and the other thing was cover crop. So when you go around and you talk to producer, you still have quite a bit of producer not quite knowing yet which cover crop work, because they just were used to think that it's just too much competition. Someone like Claude does cover crop. We'll talk about Montirus, who does cover crop. So some people do, but it's still kind of a learning curve for many people. So le Syndicat des Côtes du Rhône is really giving tools and information to really promote cover crop, to find the right type of cover crop that will work, especially leave the cover crop in the wintertime. That's really crucial, because if you have a cover crop in the wintertime, it helps the water to go down, to stay down. And comes the spring, well, you can mow, you can have the sheep who will cut down the cover crop. You can, as Stéphane was showing, you can roll down the cover crop, you can introduce it in the earth, so it actually prevents from evaporation of the soil. You can have mulch with it. So cover crop are really, really important. And in Côtes du Rhône, it's a big switch that's being done. So exploring the different species, indigenous species that can work, whether they're annual or you plant them every year. Vine training. I don't know if you saw, but when Lilian had the video, there were some vines who had what we call pont rhodonien. So it really is like an arch. So of course, gobelet works, bush vines work. We're doing some research on that. But some people are starting also to use pont rhodonien because it creates more shade, right? So that's another thing that we can do. Vine density. We were always told that to make quality wine, you need high vine density. Well, depends where you are. If you're in Santorini, if you're in Jerez, you don't have high vine density because the vines will die. So we're starting to change the vine density going forward, thinking that maybe we need to reduce the vine density so that there's not too much competition, again, for water. Rootstock selection we've talked about. So at the end, is dry farming better? To a point, right? It's good not to rely on it. It's good to do everything you can. The rootstock, the grape, the cover crop, every single step you can take to really preserve the plant's water, the soil's moisture. But at the end, if it becomes too extreme, your vine will die. So it's really easy for us to sit and say irrigation is bad when you're a producer. If you want to be sustainable, sometimes you do need water. But you need to do everything that you have on hand to use as little as possible, because we know that it is a resource that's going to be becoming more challenging. There's a big debate right now about the date of derogation. So basically what happens is if you're a producer in the south of France, in Côtes du Rhône we're talking about, and you have a year like 2022 where it's really dry and really hot, you can ask for derogation to irrigate. The problem is, often by the time the derogation comes, it's not at the time you want water in your vine. Basically, the best time to get water is up to before flowering. That's, mostly in the winter and up to flowering. But by the time you have fruit set, till veraison, within that period, you don't want too much water. So often the derogation comes when you have the fruit set. So there's some producers who are saying, well, the INAO needs to change the date when you can irrigate. We need it earlier. By the time we get it, it's not really the time we want. So Edouard Guérin, who is the technical director at Augier, has some personal idea on water irrigation. So he shared us what he thought when we were there last week.
That's a really simple question, and I can't answer directly. I'm not for or against irrigation. Irrigation is, of course, an answer to this climate change that we have. We have more and more drought, definitely, and irrigating is a way to help vines to grow and to stay alive and to produce crop. But we have two things to change in France. First is the rules, because for most of the place in France, we can irrigate only on a short period, by the end of June until mid-August. For very warm and dry vintage like 2017 or 2019, we have no rain between January until sometimes end of September. So during all the growing season, we have no rain, so that's a really big stress. So in this case, it would be very interesting to irrigate earlier than June, like April or May. And the time when we stop irrigation, mid-August, is also not there is no link between this time and the harvesting date. For example, for vintage, which is a bit late, could be harvesting mid-October, but when we stop irrigating mid-August, it makes a very long time between the end of irrigation and the harvest date, and it can be a really big water stress during this period. For some vintage like 2022, this is exactly the opposite. We had to stop irrigation mid-August, but we harvested this year on the 22nd of August, so only 1 week after. So we really need to have a better link between the weather, the vine needs, and the period of irrigating. And the second thing is really the way to irrigate. In France, like many countries, unfortunately, we don't irrigate enough. We irrigate, but too often. What is important is to irrigate and make like a big rain. Bringing water every week, sometimes twice in a week, means that we just bring water in 20 or 30 centimeters. If we bring water in 20, 30 centimeters in the soil, the roots are not going deeper. What we need is to bring more water to make sure that roots are growing deeper. More water, but not very often, once in a month or once every 2 months. We have to make like if it was raining. So the two things that could be great with irrigation would be really to change the way to irrigate and to change the periods of irrigation. And I think irrigation could be a very good answer for this climate evolution.
So change a little bit what we learned about irrigation. Thinking of drip irrigation is best. He thinks that in fact imitating rain is more beneficial because it's more natural and the water goes deeper and then you don't irrigate as much, where if you do it often, the vine gets a bit addicted and it's not really efficient. So in other words, I think it's interesting to keep in mind, to have an open mind and look at what is possible. Also interesting in terms of the soil type, because of course we learned that clay retains more water than sand. But we often talk about, let's say, the galets, those galets roulés, right? That absorbs heat and helps to ripen the grapes. Interesting, because I was just with Edouard last week in the Rhône, and he said to me, I just always kind of was troubled with the fact that it ripens earlier with the galets, because the reality is the galets, when you have them on top of the land, it actually keeps the moisture in. So underneath, it's actually cooler. The roots are in a cooler ground. And so he's actually put some probe and he's doing some experiment right now. It's not finished, but so far what he's found is exactly that, where in fact the galets, what they're helping is to keep the moisture. And in fact, some of his parcels are ripening a bit later because it's keeping the moisture. So What's great with the type of soil in the Rhône Valley, in the Côtes du Rhône, is you have a lot of different type of soil, so which helps. And also, if you talk to producer, they notice a different pH according to the type of soil. So for example, on limestone, typically you will have lower pH than on sandy soil. So type of soil, water retention, the good thing is we have, they play for sure a role in regulating the water supply for producer. We've talked about planting density in gobelet. I wanted, so there's also some research being done right now at l'Institut Rhodanien with agroforesterie. And the other thing that the Syndicat de Côtes du Rhône wanted to put forward in terms of knowledge to producer this year was make an emphasis on agroforesterie. So just as much as edge as trees, it's a complicated science. You need to know what you're doing when you're planting trees so that they don't compete with what the vines need. But if you do it properly, it has a huge benefit. It increases biodiversity. Someone was explaining to me that, if you have edge, for example, well, the bat, which eat a lot of insect, in one night, a bat can eat 10 times the size of its weight in insect. That's huge. That replaces a lot of chemicals for insecticide, right? Just to have those bats. But those, if you have edge within the rows, it helps because the bats cannot see. And the way they operate is with waves. And so if they have a repère, if they see a landmark, which is the edge, they will come through and it will help them to fly and eat the insect. The other thing, of course, with the trees, it can help with erosion, against erosion, especially if you have that mixed with cover crop. It can give you some shadow. And so in the context of too much sun, that can help you. Something I never really realized before, and someone told me last week, is actually if you are in a situation where you can plant the tree and the vine together, and you need to plant the good type of tree, what's great is if you choose a proper tree, they will have roots that go in a way that's very vertical, and they go deeper than the roots of the vine. And what they do is they bring back to the surface the water for the roots of the vine. I've never heard of that before, but that's amazing. So someone, when you decide to promote agroforestery and plant different type of trees, you really need to ask expert who knows what they're doing, because it's a fine line between having a tree that competes for water with the vines, and if that case, you can have disaster, or having the right type of tree that actually can provide more water for your vine. And we're also testing nettings. So, they're not allowed right now, but could we have nets? Because they provide, they actually block the UV, provide shadow, and therefore decrease the temperature within the canopy. So there are also some research being done at l'Institut Rhodanien. And of course, the color of netting also has a different impact on the heat, whether it's green, white, black. So beautiful pictures of old vine in gobelet. So gobelet definitely adapted. Pests and diseases, while it's a challenge, it doesn't matter who you talk to in the world. With climate change, one of the challenges is the increased pests and diseases, and pests you haven't seen before, or diseases you haven't seen before within your region. So you need to kind of relearn how to do things. The insect, of course, where they live is linked to the temperature. So we're seeing a change in the pests that are arriving in regions. Just to give you a few examples. For example, the grapevine moth. Well, we're seeing that they have more cycle of reproduction within a year. So you have more of them. The other thing is we're realizing that if we have more elevated CO2 in the atmosphere, they lay more egg during the night. So that the elevated CO2 also has an impact on the way the insect lay their eggs. They lay more. The other thing is still is realizing that we use pheromone traps, which work quite well. Well, if you're in an area where the wind is even stronger, well, the moth cannot smell the pheromone anymore. So those pheromone traps are not working as well. If you look at mealybug, right? So mealybug, which is the insect that spreads the grapevine leaf roll associated virus, which reduce the yield and delay the ripening process. Well, the mealybug with increased heat, they hide behind the bark of the tree. So they're very, very hard for the other insect to eliminate them. Or if you want to treat them, it's getting very difficult because they are behind that trunk. They hide behind from the heat. The leafhopper, we're seeing an increase of leafhopper, which some scientists are saying leafhopper, which carry flavescence dorée, is as important as a type of disease as phylloxera was at the time. So flavescence dorée is becoming a huge problem. If you find a vine affected by flavescence dorée, you actually have to repop the vine. It's a mandatory by the appellation everywhere in France. You also have to spray for leafhopper. So around the perimeter of your vineyards, you have to spray. Esca, something that's was always prominent in hot climate, even more now. We have two types, like the esca. If you have the esca, which is the apoplexy. Apoplexy is the type of esca where the vine can die in 2 days. So you have kind of two types of esca. One of them will go over time, can take years for the vine to die. But the most severe form of esca, your vine dies in a couple of days. The problem is the increased temperature is actually, with the increase of temperature, you're seeing more cases of apoplexy. So you're seeing more vines dying in a few days. So one of the solutions is, of course, the way you prune your vine needs to respect your sap flow. So you need more. So that's crucial. There's been some trials with perivitrum, which is more. Not perivitrum, but trichoderma, which is natural. Some producers are using it, not finding it working. Others are saying maybe, but very challenging. Of course, more mildew. So that is why to increase your biodiversity in your vineyard is extremely important. And to find out also if you have new pest and disease or more disease, what kind of cover crop can help you mitigate those challenges. So it's not easy. Chemicals, well, Côtes du Rhône is working really hard to put in place a measure so that we reduce the amount of chemicals that we're using, whether it's chemical weeding, pesticide, herbicide. So there's a huge commitment from Côtes du Rhône to reduce the chemicals within being used. So this is just kind of one example. They have in Côtes du Rhône a landscape charter, which the objective is to increase biodiversity by having hedge, trees, shrubs, cover crops. And so they're doing some research, but also really sharing with producers the type of cover crop, trees, and hedge that works for their land. So we're trying to find, right, a kind of a compromise where we have a natural ecosystem, we have the agricultural land, and then we have contacts. So how can we create a more balanced ecosystem? So that's the whole purpose of it, especially with the urban sprawl and all the activity we have from the agricultural side, is to find a way to have a more balanced ecosystem. So vegetation, we talked about why it's important. We talked about the prevention of evaporation. but it's also helping to have more microbial activity, right? There's a lot of study being done right now on mycorrhiza, right? Those fungus in the soil. So if you have cover crop and you introduce cover crop in your soil and therefore, they will degrade and become humus, that actually promotes more mycorrhiza, the fungus. And the fungus is quite important. Basically, the way mycorrhiza works is the fungus, the mycorrhiza, they kind of work with the vine, they work together. So the vine gives the carbohydrate to the mycorrhiza, which the mycorrhiza need, and in return, the mycorrhiza helps the vine to transport the water and the nutrients to the vine. So it helps the roots of the vine to transport the nutrients and the water to the vine. In the context of drought and climate change, mycorrhiza plays a really important role because you're going to provide more water to the vine, right? So cover crops is good for that, prevent erosion, but also regulate the quality, right? So it has a filtration ability. So you're going to have better water source for your vine. It also controls the runoff. If you have really more steep vineyards, to have the cover crop will slow down. We don't talk so much today about all the equipment you use in the vineyard, but it's, soil management is extremely important. Pontet did an experiment in Bordeaux. In the past, they were using kind of regular tractor to go on their vineyards, and they realized that in a short amount of time, their vineyards were compacted at 50 centimeters deep. That's a lot, because if the rains come, and if it doesn't come often like it is in the Rhône, the water just runs off. But if you have a soil that's really aerated, right, well aerated, and those microorganisms and that humus, that the compost and those cover crops will help you to have a soil that's a lot more aerated, and when the water comes, it stays in the soil. And so it's really important too to use equipment, tractors that are more lightweight. So luckily, the new equipment, now you can buy lightweight tractors. Some people are going back to the animals, whether you're using horse. The human obviously is not as heavy. So, if you're working on the land, you really have to be aware of the soil compaction. I've asked, so some of you have met Christine Sorel. I think some of you were there recently. The wines are well known, I think, in Toronto. Montirus, really nice family. They've been biodynamic since 1996. It was kind of a generation challenge, I would say. Their family were not at all biodynamic. Our parents were more conventional. And at the time, our daughter got sick. And all the medication, nothing was working. And she just started to work with homeopathic. And that's kind of what got back her daughter back healthy. And at the same time, she met François Boucher, who's kind of a guru in biodynamic. And that's how she started to work biodynamic. And she did a little video for us. She talks about how in years like 2022, where it's hot and it's dry, how biodynamic practice, which of course include cover crop. If you go and visit her and her husband, Eric, cover crops are there all year long. So she realized that the alcohol are not extreme. She has water and things are just self-regulating. So she's done a little video for us to explain how that works.
Good morning, I'm Christine Sorel, the 5th wine grower generation on our family domain in the Southern Rhône Valley with my husband Eric, and we converted the domain in biodynamic culture in 1997. I consider that practicing biodynamic way of farming is an eye-opener to nature and its equilibrium. It's a real tool to be reconnected to our earth's human instinct. A real tool for having new human reaction when climate conditions are totally unexpected. It means we need to readapt our human reaction choosing the solution the most logical for nature, not for us. An example? This summer 2022, 45 degrees Celsius in Southern Rhône Valley in our vineyard. No rain from April to mid-August. Bring water by irrigation sounds obvious. With Eric, we stayed tuned to the impact of the heat on the vineyard. What's happened on the leaves, their shapes, the color, are still alive, are still strong enough to support that heat or not. And mid-July, our observation and our knowledge about the biodynamic gave us a solution. No irrigation, of course. No bring water in the subsoil or in the vines is not the deal for us. We know that it's just for now, not for the future of our vines and human life. But plowing the surface of the soil, something like 5 centimeters, following the expiration of the earth from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. every day. It's like if you bring twice volume of water without irrigation, just because you plow at a good moment with the expiration of the earth. We did it, and we had a real success. Our grapes are juicy, mature, not too much of alcohol, so we were very pleased by the 2022 vintage, and the vines are still alive. Biodynamic preparation are an answer to reinstall the life on the subsoil, supporting the fauna, the forest, trees, wild plants. Year after year of practices of biodynamic, we can see the positive impact on our environment. Each micro-terroir respected impact positively the climate changing.
One thing we don't talk so much about today, but I do want to mention it because obviously it's something that's in the news, is regenerative agriculture, meaning carbon sink in the soil. Some research are showing that if we do things properly, the agriculture sector could sink carbon in the soil. We could offset We could offset the carbon production by 41% just by sinking the carbon in the soil. The thing is, it's quite complicated. There's a lot of research being done right now in Montpellier, in other parts. I was just with another researcher last week in France. So they're doing some research to really understand. It varies, the carbon sink varies according to the type of soil you have, to the type of crop you have. So there's a lot of things we still need to figure out, but of course we know for a fact, though, that if you do have healthy soil that are with more microorganisms, a lively soil, whether it's through organic, biodynamic, living cover crops, all of those things we've talked about, that you have more chance to carbon sink more, to sequestrate more carbon in the soil. But how much and how to promote it more, like I said, a bunch of university and research centers in the world are working on that right now to have a bit more knowledge. So the question, irrigate or not irrigate, you see different opinions. Again, I think it's good to keep all of that knowledge and choose what is right for you. In the winery, obviously in a hot region like the Rhône, like Côtes du Rhône, the alcohol is rising. So the idea is to make balanced wine, so it can be a bit of a challenge, and also when you have higher pH, especially if you're a producer who don't want to use a lot of SO2 or no SO2, when you have high pH, it becomes very challenging for microbial stability. So how do you adjust your pH? How do you adjust the alcohol level? There's lots of different tools you can have. The great things in Côtes du Rhône is you have a lot of different grapes, and you can actually use white grape that have a lower pH in the blend. So that's something that is a tool that's quite helpful. Then we're going to look at some yeast in a bit. So there are some type of yeast out there that will allow you to produce more sugar, less sugar, more acidity, therefore lesser alcohol. Of course, technology exists, and adding water is illegal. So, to preserve acidity, blending we've talked about, blocking malolactic. We know that malo is done on the reds. When we think of the whites, so basically when you do malolactic fermentation, you can have up to 1 gram degradation of malic acid by doing the malic. So you reduce your total acidity by 0.4 gram, just to give you an example, right? The thing is, malolactic, it's not just about making a softer, rounder wine. It impacts the flavor of the wine, but also the stability of the wine, right? So it's not just saying, well, we're going to preserve more acidity. It actually has an impact on the stability of your wine. And if you want to block malo, you need to add SO2. You also need to chill down your stainless steel, and therefore you use more energy. So if you're kind of using the full circle, is blocking malo really the right thing? Good to think about. Acidification, it's being used in Côtes du Rhône, and not by everyone. Someone like Christine Sorel doesn't use it, but you could have the producer in a year like 2022, they might use acidification. The type of yeast, I'm a bit of a geek, so I love yeast, and I wrote the microbiology section in my book. But I just wanted to give you some ideas on some of the things that people are exploring with in the winery. So type of yeast that do different things. One of the things is l'alving, which is actually allowed in organic production because it's a non-active yeast that you spray on the leaves of the vine. And so what it does, the challenge right now is that often you have high sugar, lower acid, but you don't quite have your phenolics ripe. So l'alving, if you spray, it actually accelerates your phenolic ripeness. And so you can harvest at a time where you have, at the same time, phenolic ripeness and the right level of acidity. So I've talked to a few producers who are exploring with it, and they say you can harvest sometimes 10 days earlier, and you have kind of that right balance of phenolic and acidity. So all of those are in trials, right? You can use them, the product available on the market, but a lot of people are playing with it kind of to see what, again, exploring the solution. The other thing is Ionis. So Ionis is a type of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So it's a type of yeast that basically, usually when you produce alcohol, you need 16.83 grams of sugar for 1% of alcohol. With that type of yeast, you need 17.3 grams of sugar. So you need more sugar to produce the same amount of alcohol, 1%. So what it means at the end is if you have a wine with less alcohol, more acidity. So that's also something that people are experimenting with. And l'Achancea thermotolérant, I've talked to quite a few producers who have played with this. And basically what it does, it's a non-Saccharomyces. And there's a lot of research being done right now. We always talked about Saccharomyces because they're the one who ferment. But there's a lot of research being done with the non-Saccharomyces and saying, okay, those play an important part. So what we do is at the beginning of the fermentation, we add the non-Saccharomyces cerevisiae, so in that case, the l'Achancea thermotolérant. And what they do at the beginning is they actually use some of the sugar and transform the sugar into acidity. Okay? And then what you do is after 24 to 72 hours, you inoculate with cerevisiae, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, to now start the alcoholic fermentation. So within that, so what it means is that by the time your Saccharomyces cerevisiae starts fermentation, there's less sugar and you have more acidity. So your final wine has more acidity. And the non-Saccharomyces cerevisiae are also being studied in terms of the role they can do if your producer, let's say, who want to use less sulfur. If you have a high pH, it's challenging, especially if you have, for example, cold maceration at the beginning, where your wine is not protected if you don't want to use SO2. So one of the things they're exploring is non-Saccharomyces cerevisiae, like Mechnicoia pulcherrima, Mechnicoia fructicola. There are two types of non-Saccharomyces. They will not ferment. What they do is they actually reproduce quite quickly at cold temperature, and they occupy the space. By occupying the space, they don't leave room for the microbes, for the bad guys to take room. So they call it like a positive microflora. It's something that's been studied at Institut Rodanier, but with different companies as well, because they know it's working. So what it means for the producer during that time of cold maceration, if your wine is not protected and you don't want to add SO2 at that time, then it allows you not to add SO2, but having protection against those bad guys, if you want, those microbes that could spoil your wine with VA, with oxidation, before you start your fermentation. So usually what people do is they will have the positive microflora at the beginning, have the non-Saccharomyces, and after 72 hours, whatever, they will then add the Saccharomyces, who will start the fermentation. So again, those are all things that people are exploring with as solution in the context of higher pH. In the winery, we use a lot of water, right? Lots of water. 2 liters of water needed per liter of wine produced, and quite a bit of that is for bottling. So it's really important for a winery to look at the water you're using and find a way to recycle that gray water. How can you reuse that gray water? We're going to have a little video of Gabriel Meff in a little bit. Gabriel Meff has done a lot of work to find ways to keep that water down, the water usage, and to kind of recycle that water. So you need to capture it, reuse it, treat it, and you reuse it. There's lots of companies that can help producers if they don't know where to start, of course, to do that. Waste management is common sense. There are some wineries in the world that are zero waste, so it's possible. We need to aim for that. We feel good to recycle, but then where does it go? And so the idea is to look at what you buy. So if you buy something, does it have a warranty? How long is it going to last? But also work with the suppliers you have. Companies that produce more usually have a bit more negotiating power and say, okay, well, I buy my water bottles, my wine bottle from you. Well, can you then come back and pick up all of my cardboard, and then you reuse it again? So you can start to work with your suppliers to convince them to be part of the chain. It's not enough what you do, but it's also to work with people who are like-minded. And sometimes people might not even know, but I actually know producers who start talking to the supplier and said, well, if you're not willing to move with us, we'll just go to someone else. And that supplier has actually changed the way they work. And so it is possible, and that dialogue is extremely important. Of course, to include your staff in that, the idea is to preserve the natural resources. And by doing that, usually at the end of the day, you're actually saving money as well. The good thing too is that the largest part of waste in wineries can be composted. So now there's so many options. You can have biomass. You can turn that biomass into energy. You can sell often to a pharmaceutical company that can transform those products. There's a food company who will transform into flour, into grapeseed oil. So there's lots of things you can do with the waste, with the grapes and leftover after fermentation. Energy management, so important, and that's true for CO2 emission. you cannot change what you don't measure, right? Before, whether it's water management, whether it's your energy management, whether it's your CO2 production, if you want to change things, you need to know where you're starting from first. So there are some companies that can help producers to kind of do the inventory and then have a strategy, and you cannot do everything at once. So it's to be patient and say, okay, well, we are going to look at where we're using the most energy and start from there. And of course, we say, well, insulated building. Sometimes you buy, you've had the same building for years, you're just not going to move to another building. Perhaps you can do some changes. I was at a winery last week, and you know what they say, Michel, it's just the gros bon sens, it's just common sense. We haven't changed the building, we've changed everything inside. We realized that, between that time and that time of the night, or it's cool inside the building. We don't need to keep our musk cool or wine cool. We stop the temperature. So, changing the lights. There's so many little things that you can do within a winery to save energy. And at the end of the day, it adds up. It makes a big difference. So talking to other producers who already have done that really helps. Solar panel. We're seeing producers in Côtes du Rhône who have solar panel. This image was taken from Sustainable California Wine Growing, but it was done in 2011. But there's lots of other wine regions who've done the same thing afterwards, and they come up with pretty much the same result. So if we look at it, what we understand is that and it should say packaging, not transportation. It's a typo. You can see transport as well on this, but what I want to show here is packaging. So roughly, packaging is responsible for up to 40% of the carbon footprint of a bottle of wine. It varies, of course, if you use different type of bottles, lightweight, but up to 40% of the CO2 emission of a bottle is from packaging. For us in the room, this is extremely important to know, because this is something we actually can do when we talk to consumer, when you write in your magazine, when you recommend the wine. There's no reason in 2022, I don't care if you're natural, biodynamic, organic, if your bottle weighs 1 kilo, I don't want to buy it. There's no reason, maybe except right now we're in a bit of a scarce. I know some producers are having trouble finding glasses because there's a shortage of glasses, and I know some producers are having difficulty finding lightweight. It's a real problem. But besides that, there's no reason. So we have the wine industry a huge role to play to educate consumer. The consumer want to do something. When you go to the hotel room and they ask you whether you want to reuse your towel or keep it to save water, we all do it. The problem is with climate change, and that's been shown by psychologists, why are humans not doing enough, knowing we're hitting the wall right now. We all know it. We're seeing it. We're in denial. Well, the way our brain works is that very much deal with what's happening now. And if we do something now, we need to see the result. That's the way the human brain works. That's been researched by psychologists. And so the problem with the carbon emission, we don't see a result now. The people who will see a difference are going to be the next generations. So the consumer, I know in Montreal when we had the big climate change walk, it was a record. We had 500,000 of people walking on the street. People want to be part of it. People want to do something. They just don't know how to start. And that towel I'm talking about, it's something that you can see, because by not using your towel, again, you see it's still there. If you bring your coffee cup, your mug to the coffee shop, you know that you're not using a coffee mug. But with CO2, it's a bit complicated. We don't see an immediate. I say the wine industry, we have an amazing opportunity, because we can tell a message every time someone buys a bottle. We have the possibility to feel, to make the consumer empowered. Every time they buy a bottle of wine, we can tell them a message that they're doing the right gesture by choosing a lightweight bottle or another type of packaging. And this is just that. We'll talk about label in a second. So it's our job to really give that information. And of course, transportation plays a big part of it too. Up to 13% of the carbon footprint is from transport. I've asked Hillebrand to do something for me at my last conference and for my book. So they've kind of showed on an index for transportation. You can see from the index increasing on the carbon footprint when it gets to air freight. The good news is when we talk about air freight in the wine industry, we don't really use it. We use mostly train, trucks, or boat. So that's the good news. If we look at the boat, what's interesting here, so they did a simulation. What if that wine was leaving from Barossa Valley all to Montreal via Port of Valencia? You can see the CO2 emissions, the kilogram of CO2 per liter. So the best way to ship wine is in bulk. If you look at the very bottom, if you look at flexi tank and ISO tank, those are two types of container in which you send bulk wine. I'll tell you bulk wine. We are like, ooh, bulk wine is bad wine. We have to change the mindset. 90% of the wine that is purchased at the wine store are consumed within the first week. Not everyone is a DRC, right? A lot of wines are meant to drink now. So do we really need to send all of that wine in a bottle? Perhaps bottling on site, if we have good bottlers, is key. In Canada, we're way behind the time. In England, they've been doing it for a long time. In Germany, they've been doing it for a long time. That's an easy way to reduce the carbon footprint. Ship in bulk, your entry-level wine, your everyday drinking wine, why not? It makes sense. Then, interesting to look at whether you ship a dry container versus insulated container versus a reefer container. So, if you look at a dry container, meaning it's not refrigerated. So you're setting your bottle into a container where there's no temperature control, okay? If you have temperature control, which is the reefer container, you increase the carbon footprint. But if you just insulate that container, and as a producer, you can decide to ask that, so your container is insulated, then you have the same carbon footprint. So the best thing is a flexi tank, bulk. But if you send it, on boat in the bottle, the best thing is the bottle, insulated container versus refrigerated container. You've probably all seen that before because it's been, people are using it. It's from Alco. I like, in terms of market. The Scandinavian market are my hero. Sweden, I love them. I want them to speak at my next conference. They are way ahead of us. In Sweden, 52% of the wine sold on the shelves are from bag-in-box. In fact, a lot of qualitative producers have seen their product refused because they were not willing to put it in an alternative container. And they really educate consumer. Consumer have no problem because we educated them. So here, we need to educate consumer. We have a lot of work to do and we can all do it together. So just to give you an idea, it gives you, I think the image speaks loud enough. You can see that the traditional heavy bottle is much more carbon emission than your carton, your wine pouch, your aluminum. The best solution, the thing with your bag-in-box, of course, is that the pouch itself is not recyclable, so that's an issue. The best thing we could do really is to reuse that bottle, right? There's lots of companies, some regions are doing some trials. In Styria, in Austria, there's a region doing some trials. Miguel Torres in Spain is doing some trials. I know some people are working on the European level with legislation, trying to convince them to come up with only 4 or 5 types of bottles. So if you produce, if you're a wine that produces a $15 bottle of wine in high volume, why not have only 4 or 5 types of bottles you can use? So this way, when it arrives to another market, it's much easier to wash and reuse those bottles. So I know some people are working with the European Union, trying to change, but it's complicated. And also, as you know, some regions like Côtes du Rhône, well, you have special bottles, right? So we need to come up with a way so that globally we can actually reuse bottle. In the meantime, until it's possible, lightweight bottle is the thing. And here's a video on Gabrielle Meff, who's talked about lightweight bottle. They've done a lot of work to reduce the lightweight, and I think what's great is that they have the engraved bottle in Côtes du Rhône. That's the case for them. So she talks about the challenge, but also how they make it work and how much CO2 they have reduced just by doing that.
On a calculé notre bilan carbone donc il y a une dizaine d'années pour essayer justement de voir ce que ça représentait par rapport à nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Et en fait, c'est à peu près un tiers des émissions sur une bouteille que l'on commercialise. Donc du coup, c'est vrai que depuis 2009, on a commencé à alléger de moins de 10% certaines de nos bouteilles à marque propre, avec notamment un écusson. Donc ça fait maintenant une quinzaine d'années que l'on est sur cet allègement. Maintenant, on est sur des bouteilles là, comme celle que j'ai en main, qui est notre bouteille de la gamme Louis Bernard, où on voit cette armoirie, toujours capsule à vis, où là, on a baissé en fait le poids, on est passé de 570 grammes à 410-420 grammes. Donc en 10 ans, on est allé jusqu'à moins 20, voire moins 25% de verre en moins, donc de poids de bouteille en moins. Ceci est, on va dire, assez remarquable puisque ça permet à la fois d'optimiser les livraisons que le verrier nous fait, c'est-à-dire qu'il met plus de bouteilles dans un camion. Donc là, l'impact est très significatif sur les émissions de gaz à effet de serre que lui a et engendre dans le transport des bouteilles vides. Ensuite, nous, sur nos lignes, on a 2 lignes d'embouteillage, une qui est automatisée au niveau de l'encaissage, de la mise en carton, et l'autre qui est manuelle. Il faut aussi avoir en tête que cette diminution de poids, ça veut dire que pour les personnes qui qui ont à encaisser manuellement ces bouteilles, ça fait aussi de la charge en moins, du poids en moins par jour, et ça va jusqu'à des tonnes, on va dire, en moins à manipuler. Ensuite, nous, quand on expédie vers nos clients, c'est pareil, le client va avoir plus de bouteilles sur une palette, donc on optimise aussi le chargement. Et donc, si on ramène les gaz émis pendant le transport à effet de serre, on a moins de gaz par bouteille expédiée vers nos clients. Et puis, quand on met en rayon aussi, c'est aussi du poids en moins. Et après, on va jusqu'au ce qu'on appelle le cycle de vie de la bouteille. Quand la bouteille est bue, en termes de déchets, même si c'est valorisé, le verre est vraiment, on va dire, indéfiniment recyclable, ça fait aussi des déchets, des tonnages de déchets en moins à collecter ensuite pour les revaloriser. Alors depuis notre démarche, donc qui date de 2008-2009, on est à une économie en termes de tonnes d'équivalent CO2 rejetées ou en moins dans le process et dans la commercialisation à 1642 tonnes en moins. Et c'est un équivalent d'une économie de d'un peu près de plus de 2000 tonnes de verre évitées en fait, que l'on n'a pas eu à générer, que le verrier n'a pas eu à fabriquer.
So Gabrielle Meff, but obviously other wineries in the Rhône are doing the same thing. I want to talk about closure. I've kind of put on the chart here a difference between the cork, the aluminium, and the plastic stopper. Aluminium became very popular with the TCA problem. A lot of producers are actually going back to cork. They're realizing it's a more sustainable product for a lot of different reasons, for the energy it uses, but also from its recyclable, biodegradable ability. So a cork tree takes about 25 years until you can harvest the cork of a tree. And after that, every time you harvest the cork from the tree, you increase the ability of the tree to capture carbon by 5 times. So I don't know why some people always say, oh, it's not sustainable. It's quite the opposite, actually. Cork trees in the world are responsible for a large amount of carbon sink. And every time you harvest the cork from that tree, you increase its ability to capture carbon by 5 times. So a company like Amorim will tell you that they're carbon negative because the whole process. And after that, well, it's biodegradable. Of course, what we want to see is if you're in a restaurant, maybe to have your own program, you collect the cork and you send it back to the company. And from that, they can do walls, shoes, bags, and so on. That's the best solution where it's full circle. But the worst case scenario, a natural cork, is biodegradable. So the worst case goes to your compost, biodegradable. On top of it, you can sink carbon. So basically, so one cork can sink up to 592 grams per cork. That's actually the sparkling wine cork, which is the biggest. But some of them can sink 396 grams. So cork is definitely a sustainable choice, and for that reason, like I said, if you talk to companies that sell cork, they have seen in the last year a growth. People are leaving the screw crack, going back to cork because it is a more sustainable product. It's confusing for consumer. They don't know where to start. Just imagine that you were working in a different type of field and you did not know much and you want to make a difference. Wine has been very, very bad at communicating to consumer. I know when I buy coffee, if I see free trade, I feel good because I feel like I'm buying the right type of coffee. With the bottle of wine, you have the medals, the awards, lots of different labels. The consumer is completely lost. We could talk about natural wine. A lot of people, actually, when you talk to consumer, they buy it not only because they think it's better for their body, but a lot of consumers actually think it's better for the planet without really realizing what it means. So the consumer, especially the young generation, is extremely interested. And currently, the wine industry, we're losing young consumer to spirit, to beer. Yet we have so many things that they want. We have grapes. It's a pretty simple process in terms of production. There's not much things added to wine. And then on top of it, if we make wine in a sustainable way and we can communicate that to consumer, I think we're going to gain back some of this consumer we're losing. So this is my sales pitch, is that you all have a role in the room to communicate to those consumers. The consumer did not wake up one day and say, I like natural wine, I like orange wine. We told them to enjoy those wines. So those trends start somewhere. Why not start that trend with sustainable product? Why not make a priority in your wine program when you write about wine? Do your research before you promote a wine on Instagram. Well, what does that producer do? Are they conscious about sustainability? Well, maybe don't take that money for that post, or maybe don't put that on your wine list. So start introducing those wines to consumers so that when they go to the liquor store and they're left on their own device, they're better equipped. there's a lot of research that's been done by companies like Wine Intelligence. And what came up of those researches is that what labeling needs to do is creative, short, and easy to understand. The way our brain works, there's two sides of the brain, and the brain that needs to weigh the pros and cons are left for important things. Education of your kids, and so on. When you go to the liquor store and your kids are waiting in the car, you're not going to use that part of your brain that weighs the pros and cons of the right bottle of wine. You have a few seconds, and that energy is you're just going to pick a bottle of wine. Very few people read the back label. The geeks do. It's a small percentage. So how can we communicate quickly that this is a bottle that kind of checks those spots, lightweight bottle, sustainable, and unfortunately, and I know for some producers, certification are more complicated because they cost money, you have an audit, it requires more work, but I just don't know any other way. And they've done some research with consumers also. If you give consumer different type of labeling, organic, biodynamic, sustainable, there's consistent research with different companies that always come up with the same answer, is that consumer, even though they're more familiar, let's say, with organic because they buy organic food, given the choice between a label that organic or sustainable, they're more likely to choose sustainable because even though they don't fully understand what it means in totality, they feel it's better, that it kind of has a whole meaning, not beyond organic. So why not adopt, if you're an organic producer, have that organic certification, but maybe adopt a sustainable type of certification? I think we have a responsibility in the wine industry to communicate that to consumer. And personally, I don't know any other way than the sommelier, the journalist doing the right thing, but also on the bottle from the producer having some of those certifications. Côtes du Rhône is doing a lot of work to really encourage producers to have sustainable certification, HVE, Haute Valeur Environnementale. And there's other certification, as Philippe mentioned at the beginning, but having those certifications, and Côtes du Rhône understood that, and that's why they're really, really pressing producer to get that certification. And that level, the amount of producer getting that certification increases all the time. So HVE, high environmental value, haute valeur environnementale. So it's something that looks, and I've talked to producers who are organic, but they also want HVE because it includes other parameters than just organic. So, agroforestry, for example, is something that it will be celebrated. So the whole sustainable, we're looking at the whole sustainable circle, not just one part of the equation. So Côtes du Rhône is really, really encouraging producers to be certified. And the last slide before we go to the wine you will be tasting, I just wanted to kind of keep that in mind for us that recommend wine to consumer. This study was done in Sweden, Canada, and US, but I've read other studies from other companies, and the results are about the same. What we realize is that regardless of the age group, knowing that the product is sustainable, everyone is willing to pay a little bit more for a product that's sustainable. Baby boomers, not as much. Millennials, more. But in average, all categories of age, if you consider all categories of age, the average that a consumer is willing to pay more per bottle is $3. So it costs money for the producer to get their certification. It costs money to do organic. We're going to serve a product today, Cave d'Estésargues. I was just with them a few months ago, and they switched to organic, and they increased the production cost by 40%. It's a lot. So there's a cost to doing things right, but the good news is, from the research, the consumer, especially the younger consumer, they are willing to pay more knowing that it's sustainable. We just need to communicate that to them. So what I'm going to do very quickly, I'm going to hold you 5 more minutes, okay? We have a list of wine. Côtes du Rhône, when they asked those wines, when they selected the wine, they selected the wine based on companies who do so many of those things we've mentioned. So what I want to do before we start the tasting, just go quickly through the wines, and without telling you the grapes and the vinification, you can read that by yourself, just to tell you quickly what some of the winery do to be sustainable. So we're gonna have 11 wines, and you're gonna just enjoy some food and taste on your own pace. So the first wine is les celliers dauphins, celliers de dauphin. Something very simple. They have bag-in-box, and just by removing the plastic handle, they have reduced their carbon tons by 153 tons. So just by taking away that plastic on the bag in the box, they reduce the CO2 emissions by a lot. They are certified HVA, and they have the largest amount of hectares in Côtes du Rhône in organic. So they have 1,351 hectares organic. So they own the largest amount of hectares in organic viticulture in Côtes du Rhône. We're gonna have a red from them as well. Then we have Brot, which is sustainable. And they also have the certification Terrasse Viti, which is another sustainable certification. We have Cave de Gigondas. So for them, there was a big change in 2011. They wanted to have renewable energy. So they now have 295 solar panels, and they produce more than they use. Montirus, you've seen Christine. Christine is biodynamic, biodiversity. Gigal, a large important negociant, owns land but also buy grapes, sustainable producer. So Montfaucon, you saw Rodolphe on the video. Rodolphe is all organic vineyards. Gabriel Meff, we did not talk about ISO 26000 today, but go and research on it. When you have the ISO, the 26000 is extremely hard to achieve in terms of sustainability. It's the model basically, and it's really, really hard to achieve. And they have achieved the highest level within the ISO 26000. So she's talked about glass, but we could go from the vineyard to the glass. Everything they do to adapt to climate change, but also reduce the carbon footprint and preserve water. It's quite impressive. So if you go to the region, go visit them. It's quite the production. It's really impressive, their dedication to the environment. Domaine Autran, they are certified HVE and they are sustainable. La Montagnette, have a lot of respect for them. Cave d'Estésargues is a cooperative. They have switched to organic viticulture. It's not easy. They have increased the cost production by 40%, but they're doing it. And they also, this is a bottle, but they also work with different importers, and they have, for example, wine in pouch, so they are really open to alternative container. And the last wine, Domaine des Verquières, is an organic producer who's certified organic since 2014. I know it was a lot of information. We did not let you go to the washroom or get up. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope you learned something. We could have had this over 2 days. There's so much to talk about. I just wanted to give you an idea of what's out there, and hopefully it gives you the taste to continue and research and learn. And I'm here if you have any more questions. Thank you.